Is Germany for or against this? At the beginning, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz stood shoulder to shoulder with the US and Israel. But now he's got more questions. So, what's going on? Listen to what Friedrich Merz said in his first public remarks after the strikes. Together with the United States and Israel, we share the interest in ensuring that this regime's terror ends, and that its dangerous nuclear and ballistic program is stopped. The military strikes are intended to end the destructive game of a weakened regime. This is not without risk. Merz then called on Iran to stop its retaliatory attacks in the region. We do not know what kind of escalation the harsh Iranian retaliatory strikes may still drag the region into. And on the question of legality, Merz said he wouldn't judge. We see the dilemma. Now is not the time to lecture our partners and allies. It's worth noting that this was 2 days before Merz was due for a pre-arranged meeting in Washington with Donald Trump, and the debate about legal justifications for the attacks continued to rage. This was how Janina Dill, co-director of the Oxford Institute for Ethics, Law and Armed Conflict, put it to me. The statement by the Bundeskanzler was shocking, to be honest, because he said that he refrains from a legal assessment because it would be without implication or consequences. The reason why Israel and the United States have been able to breach international law without consequences is partly that states like Germany don't find it in themselves to actually stand up for international law and even name these violations as violations, and then stand together to impose sanctions on the violator of international law. So this is a self-fulfilling prophecy. Merz's spokesman then came under pressure to explain whether Germany deemed the strikes legal. He said that Iran had carried out serious violations for decades, and essentially admitted that sometimes security concerns do trump international law. We repeatedly reached the point where security interests and the framework of international law cannot be reconciled, around the same time as the government was defending the attacks. We asked people in Berlin how they thought the government should react. Honestly, I have to say, on the one hand, it's right that this regime fell, but I don't believe it should have fallen through war, and for that reason I think diplomatic solutions should have been brought forward. We should finally get used to using diplomacy again, and in this case, ISIS just restrained humanitarian aid always. Military, no. In general, Germany shouldn't interfere in the war, but support democratic Iranians as much as possible, but not with military means. The following day, Merz was in the Oval Office, and his focus was on who can bring stability to Iran. At this point, Merz is on a tightrope, still emphasizing where he agrees with Trump. He's keen not to antagonize the US president, but he's flagging the need for a plan. We are on the same page in terms of getting this terrible regime in Thran away. And we will talk about the day after. What will happen then if they are out? They, a reference to the ruling Iranian regime. The meeting was a prime example of how carefully leaders must tread in the Oval Office nowadays. One wrong word can trigger a slapdown or even tariffs. How are we going to treat Germany? Well, I think you should hit them very, very hard. Meanwhile, trouble is brewing within Merz's coalition at home. The defense minister of the center-left Social Democrats spoke up. Boris Pistorius, the most popular politician in the country, criticized the lack of an exit strategy. History teaches us that starting wars is much easier than ending them. Conversely, this means that a robust exit strategy is needed, and ladies and gentlemen, I do not see one at present. And then Vice-Chancellor and Finance Minister Lars Klingbeil shared his own doubts, telling reporters, Just because leading figures in the regime have been eliminated doesn't mean the regime is over. I fear this regime is quite entrenched. 20% of the world's oil sales move through the streets of Hormuz, meaning it has a huge influence on global crude prices. At this point, the blockade on the Strait of Hormuz has brought oil exports to a standstill, and Germans are starting to feel the impact of the war on themselves. It's a disaster, and I think it's going to get worse. It's gone up by 20-25p. I'll be honest, that's not acceptable. One of the economic advisors to the government warned that the conflict could trigger a rise in inflation. It is possible that rising gas and oil prices will affect electricity prices in the medium term. It may be that disruptions in supply chains will lead to price pressure, which in turn will fuel inflationary dynamics. Remember, Germany is emerging from a recession. In 2025, growth was just 0.2%. So, we have critical statements from the Social Democrats in government and growing alarm among the German public reflected in polling. A poll showed that most Germans think the attacks are not justified. But how does this compare to the Iraq War in 2003? Back then, just 14% thought the invasion was justified. So, more people opposed that war than this conflict. A majority of Germans are also concerned about the war spiraling out of control. As the war entered its second week, Merz delivered his sharpest comments yet, saying that while he shared the US and Israel's aims, more questions arise every day. We are concerned that there is apparently no joint plan for how this war can be brought quickly to a convincing end. Merz then warned that a collapse of the Iranian state and economy would be a disaster. A scenario such as we have seen in Libya, Iraq, or other countries in the region would also harm us all. This affects our security, our energy supply, and possibly also the situation surrounding migration. So far, most experts seem to agree that the likelihood of an exodus of Iranians traveling to Europe is small. But that's based on what we know now. While visiting Turkey, the German foreign minister said that issue was one they were trying to avoid. It is only right and forward-thinking that here in Turkey there are discussions going on about the potential consequences of the current crisis for possible refugee movements from Iran to Turkey. To date, we haven't seen anything like that, but we have a shared interest in preventing it. So, in the end, we have a government straddling two competing positions. Yes, wanting to show political solidarity with the US and Israel, but unconvinced by the legal justification. Yes, pleased to see the removal of the Iranian leadership, but hugely skeptical of the path forward. Ultimately, this crisis could damage Germany's standing on the international stage if it seemed to be tacitly backing a legally dubious war, while at the same time condemning Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And among society, there's not much backing for this conflict either, and worries too that it will escalate, causing more suffering in the region and to the economy at home. Which brings us back to the government. As an export nation, Germany is vulnerable, and Merz knows that antagonizing Donald Trump can lead to revenge tariffs. That would be a disaster for an economy that is only expected to go at 1% this year. The Iran conflict threatens that recovery. The knock-on effects could derail Merz's plans to get Germany back on track and tackle the much bigger structural reforms the country is facing.